I've been traveling a lot, and mostly on business. And unfortunately, they've been places that are have really interesting museums. I've been to Vienna a bunch of times, and so I knew about the Kunsthistorisches Museum and their numismatic, the Munz cabinet, and it is, just unbelievably outstanding. And so, what I did is I spent over 2 hours only in the metals cabinet, which is less than half of the collection that's exhibited, taking pictures. And I only got yelled at once, which I thought was pretty good. Um, and the collection is it almost has to be seen to be believed. It's full of rarities, things that you will not see elsewhere, and you certainly won't see in the conditions that are in this collection. But I should say right off the bat, this isn't a scholarly presentation. This is basically, pictures from my vacation. And so that's why I'm calling this the Numismatic Tourist. And, to paraphrase Mel Brooks, it's good to be king, and it's even better to be, emperor. And a lot of this collection comes from this guy, Franz Joseph, the Kaiser. And, I don't know how serious he was about, collecting, or whether or not, that was just a thing that kings did. I guess numismatic is called the hobby of kings. Here he is on one of the gold medals. And you look at this medal and it's like, oh my Lord, look at the grade on this. I mean, this is hundreds of years old, and it's big. It's probably like 2 inches across or so, maybe three. And it's this proof cameo medal. It's just fantastic. And that's what this collection is about. So here's a picture, with my thumb in it, unfortunately, of just the medals cabinet. And you can see there's another door in the back. That's a room full of coins. And then there's another room behind that, which is the special exhibits, the things that are rotating. And the medals started in this picture on the right hand side in the front, and they're sort of chronological, with the first medals being Italian Renaissance. And I'm going to try to respect some kind of chronology here, and then it sort of loops around. You end up back at these medals in the front are more modern medals, and then there's some other exhibits on the side that are interesting. And the thing I got yelled at was getting too close to these pictures on the wall, which it is hard to take. It was hard to take photos of those medals that were at the top of the cases on that wall. But I figured out a way, so she didn't yell at me again. So let's start at the beginning, which is the Italian Renaissance. And this is a medal that I actually have a copy of this, a late cast of this Italian Renaissance cast medal of Sigismondo Pandolfo Malatesta. And he was a rich Italian nobleman from Rimini. And he basically hired this guy, Matteo da Patti, to be his court medalist. And so he was active in these three towns, Venice and Verona, but mostly in Rimini, because he had this sponsorship from Malatesta. And on the back of this one, it has a really interesting castle, apparently where Malatesta probably lived. And this one is signed, and that's one of the things that makes the Da Patti medals interesting, is that they are signed. A few of these guys signed them, some of them didn't. I guess the story goes, that should be told, is that the Italian Renaissance, really starting with Pisanello, who was also a painter, basically sort of brought back the tradition of making medals that the Romans had done prior to prior to the Dark Ages. And so this really is the start of modern medals, as it were. It all started in Italy, of course. This was his mistress and later his wife, Izzata Uh, and this is a metal that I just really would love to have a late cast of, because the elephant is so interesting. Um, and again, this one is unsigned, but there are versions of this medal where it is signed up in above the elephant. Um, and this medal is, what it was, mid 15th century, so it's hundreds of years old. And look at this thing. I mean, this is just a tremendous work of art, and a tremendously well preserved, as this collection was. It's likely that Franz Joseph and his predecessors had people that that was their job, to curate their collection. It's good to be king. Here's a medal I'd never seen before. It was also Matteo de Patti, but before he went to Rimini, when he was in Verona. And they only show the back. They don't show both sides of most of these medals, but this guy Guarino had it, and he was described as a humanist. And all I could find about this medal on the internet is a fountain surmounted by a nude male figure with mace and shield. And so, here's the mace is in his right hand and the shield in his left, standing on a fountain. So, one could imagine that this fountain was in this guy's backyard, or maybe inside, for all, they did have castles. Here's another medal I never saw before. And it's by an artist that I had no familiarity before, Adriano Florentino, and the portrait of a woman. Oddly enough, I saw this same medal about 3 months later in London, in the Wallace collection. I mean, the braid is something. I mean, that looks like it was really uncomfortable. But what you do for fashion, I suppose, if you're an Italian nobleman of the Renaissance, or noblewoman rather. This one's another interesting one, another one I'd never seen before. As far as I know, there may not be any other examples of this one. It's signed by this guy, Jacopo Lixinolo, I think. There's the opus, and then here's his name right around it, and dated. And this is the only, according to the Crest book, this is the only known medal that this fellow did from Modena, where the balsamic vinegar is from. This is a later piece, and I believe this is still cast, although I'm not an expert on these things. It's Spanish, but the artist was Italian, and this is again another fantastic example of an extraordinarily rare medal with tremendous detail of this, of Apollo, riding around in the sky in his chariot drawn by four, presumably white horses. I mean, just really interesting. I did translate the Latin on this. I should have, and I didn't take Latin, even though I went to 12 years at Catholic school. This one is it was described in the notes in the cabinet as the opening of the port at Elba. And if you look at this for a while, you realize that these things that look like fish skeletons are boats with people at the oars. Neptune's below with his trident, and then Ilva is, I guess, the Latin for Elba. This one is in silver. And this one I actually do have a gold-plated 19th century cast that's really awful. This one was not awful. It has a portrait of Michelangelo on the other side, and here he's depicted as the blind wanderer. Michelangelo himself never actually did any medals, which is a pity, but because they would have been stupendous, I'm sure. Oh, and this medal is Leone Leoni was very prolific, and I'll show you a medal later in my collection, in the show and tell that he did. Generally, I'm not that interested in papal medals, but this one really kind of struck me as interesting. It's the colonnade in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. I've been there. It's a fantastic space. Um, Alexander the Seventh was really promoted the construction of this structure, and I believe it's on the site of something ancient in Rome, although I don't know the details. Um, and I think this medal is cast, but we're starting getting the time when metals could be die struck. So I'm not really sure about this one. But again, it's really interesting, metal with a lot of detail in the buildings and the colonnade itself. This one, I just changed the description because I had it wrong. Um, I had it as the Aesop's fable with the lion and the thorn. Obviously, it's not. It's a gladiator, presumably slaying a lion. Um, Underneath, it says in Latin. I did translate that. It says "Memory of Pope Benedict II," and so I'm afraid I can't really tell you anything about this medal because my notes are from the when I was at the museum are not well organized, and this is being generous. This one is also papal. It's Pope Innocent the 12th, and uh, I'm imagining that the artist Beatrice Hamerani is a woman, but I don't know that for sure. But the reverse is a motif you see a lot in Italian art of this well, not a lot, but you often see it in art of this period, and it's a pelican who's a mother pelican who's feeding its young by piercing its breast. And pelicans don't actually do this, although I guess it was believed at the time that they did. And it's an allegory for Christ who sacrificed himself for everyone else. And so it's a kind of an unusual motif. Now we're into what I think is really the fantastic part of this collection, where the early die struck 17th and early 18th century pieces, and this one is and a lot of these are battle commemorations, and that's what this one is: the siege of Genoa by the French, and it's a French artist, Francois Charon. Silver, 1684, and you can see another really interesting scene, with all these battleships, coming in and laying waste to Italy, and you got this ancient lighthouse and everything, and then some allegorical figure for "We beat you." Again, really, and again, think about how old this metal is, and look at the condition on it. It's just astonishing. And these cases are just, it just goes on and on like that. Now here's one I put in because I just like the hairdo. The portrait medals don't generally are interesting, but I thought this guy, that's a wig if I ever saw one. It's Johann Adam the First of Liechtenstein, and along that, the next guy I think's got a beat. This guy's kind of like the 17th century version of the Pompadour, George Friedrich the First of Brandenburg. Just and he's got his armor on. Both guys have armor on, I think. Yeah, there you go. They both have armor, like they ever wore it in battle, of course. But again, kind of interesting pieces. Here's another one that always appeals to me, because of just the intricacy of it. This one is again a battle. It's the liberation of Vienna from the Turks, die struck, and showing a battle scene with loads and loads of detail, and so it's not unlike some of the show thalers of this period, where they had a lot, it's a pretty large format. This is like 2.5 inches across. I mean, so, there's a lot of room for the engraver to do his craft. This one is, again, this was about the end of the war, the Peace of Westphalia and Ferdinand III. And this medal, it was, I didn't realize that until recently either. This basically, when they had this treaty, it ended a 30-year war. Um, and so you've got, Ferdinand on his horse, being all majestic and all. And I guess that's Westphalia in the background, I should imagine. Oh, and it says, uh, peace of the war for the great Ferdinand, Europe, something, something. I can't read it upside down. This one is another die struck piece. Again, lots of detail. It's a silver mine that operated for 800 years, according to Wikipedia. Um, this one I was sort of able to translate, although my high school German is really not very good. Never was. I never got an A, and some of the words are antique. But it says what men through God do, um, uh, you can see here with wonder. The weird word was this one, thunken, and it's conjugated in a way that I didn't understand, but the tune THUN means to do. That took me a while to figure out, but it's a cool mining scene. There's a gold piece that just spectacular, a view of the Austrian city of Salzburg, and you see at the bridge and the bird's eye view, which is something that when I before, and that was to be reviewed, and I was actually sent a paper that he wrote about bird's eye views to review. It was my first encounter with Bill's excellent writing. When I actually met you, Bill, I was really, is again a wartime thing. It was the annexation of the island of Corsica by France, and so it represents sort of the King of France holding a shield with Corsica represented somehow. And this is another medal where the picture is almost hard to really display how flamboyant it is. I kind of liked it because of the way the sun, with the face on it is shining. It's kind of cool. This one was just kind of funny. It's an exhibit in Nuremberg of a rhinoceros, and in the 18th century, mid 18th century, a rhino was a pretty weird thing. That was not something that most people had seen, and so apparently they had one at the zoo, and so they made a medal of it. Another one I'm showing you just because the state of preservation is so remarkable. The topic is kind of boring. Apparently, it was commemorating some office of the court being established in the town of Siebenberg. But as a as a as a medal, as an art piece, it's really pretty interesting. Very very well crafted. You have perspective in there, and all these faces, and that presumably look like the real people that were there. This one I think is particularly interesting for us as numismatists. Maria Theresa, the Empress, visited the mint in Vienna, which of course is still operational and very productive, makes a lot of interesting coins and medals. And there's lots of mint kind of things in it. You got a screw press that you can see in the background, and the guy's holding some scales so you can measure out the right amount of silver from the coins. There's a forge in the background, and then he's holding a bag of coins, but he's not very good at it. So the coins are all falling out, which I thought was kind of funny. But yeah, that's an interesting piece. Another battle one. This one took me a little while to figure out because I thought it was Kern Cologne, but it's not. It's Kolin, which is in what is now the Czech Republic, and this was a victory Austrian troops over this particular emperor Frederick. And I don't understand the allegory. I mean, this thing is broken. I guess that meant something to them. Presumably, the figure is Austrian. This one is also kind of numismatically related as well. Oddly enough, made art engraved by an Italian, but it's an Austrian piece with the reform of mining laws. And presumably, what I guess metallurgy translates to mining, I suppose. He's holding out the book of laws, and she's blessing it or something. The reform. This one's in gold. I've tried to find more about what the allegory of the Vienna piece is. It is a couple of famous paintings in museums online that depict this particular story, but I haven't yet completed the research to figure out what the three allegorical figures actually represent. But it's pretty cool metal. I got a roll of them in the basement somewhere. This is another gold one, a piece of Paris in 1814. This commemorates the Treaty of Paris, which established a peace between France, Great Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia, which of course didn't last. But metal's pretty cool. This is now in the 19th century, and this beautiful bronze proof metal, which commemorates the opening of a train from the city of Vienna to a neighboring city of Graz. And it's too bad Federico isn't here, because he and I are both interested in certain types of railroad metals. Now jumping into the 20th century, the early 20th century, I collect Art Nouveau and Art Deco metals from France. In Austria, this period is often the Art Nouveau period is referred to as Jugendstil. And this is an example, and it's different than Art Deco, although clearly an Art Nouveau, but clearly not unrelated to this particular art movement. This one is from 1916, of course, which is before the French Art Deco exhibit that sort of started the whole thing. This one really does look a lot more like some of the French metals, but indeed is Austrian. There's a lot of French metals about airplanes as well, but it usually has a flying lady with wings, and again, that's what you see here. This is from 1912, and in Vienna. Wien is German for Vienna. And then later in Vienna is an art movement, which Gustav Klimt is probably the most famous, called the Successionist. And I don't know if this artist would be considered a successionist or not. That may be a very limiting term into who's actually a successionist artist and who's not. But I kind of look that way to me. I mean, and I don't quite understand what this is. I tried to figure it out, but it's the 50th anniversary of the Protestant patents. But I don't know what patents are, and that I could not ascertain. But it's in silver. It's an interesting metal, rare, but there are some auction records of it. And this one, my notes failed me, and I couldn't figure out it at all. To me, this sort of smelled of Art Deco, but I could not find any images of this. And I tried searching for all sorts of variants of what I saw in the picture, and I couldn't figure it out. But here you have a woman with a crown representing something, holding a very unusual object, which again, not really sure even how to describe it. But it's not signed on this side, and that was sort of why I was going to take this slide out, but I thought it's a cool medal, so I'll leave it in. And now the last cabinets are really modern art medals, and by modern I mean not actually contemporary. They mostly sort of 60s and 50s and 60s. This one I thought was kind of cool. The way the sort of block structure, and you can see the man in it. It's called the City. They had several medals by this artist, Elfriede Rohr. It's about 4 inches across in the long dimension, so it's a hefty piece of cast art. And then now we have a series by the same artist, and this one was called Stations in the Life of Men. And so I'll just run through that. So this is one. They didn't tell me what these stations were. And another one. And then I think that's the last one. And maybe I have them in the wrong order. You start out skinny and get fat. I don't know. That's the end of the metal part. I just wanted to say there's a lot more to see in this museum. There's even a lot more to see in the Munz cabinet. They have a really interesting exhibit on dyes. Here you can see this large die. This is like a 3 or 3.5 inch metal from the 17th century, I suppose, and then the metal that actually was made from it. And then you've got some roller dies along here, that along with the coin that was made from them. Whoops, sorry. And then the only coin I'll show is one because I think it's an interesting copper, and I hadn't seen it before. This penny from Barbados, which I don't know this for sure, but it kind of looks like something that would have come out of the Soho Mint and Matthew Bolton, certainly in that style. And Barbados, I mean that's a pretty cool coin. There's also a lot of regular art, and I particularly wanted to see this series of paintings. And I forgot to write who the artist is, but these paintings are from the 16th century, and to me they're just really really unusual, and kind of strikes me as unusual for that time. It's not what I would have expected, where someone would have put together produce and made these paintings. They represent the four seasons, and I should have labeled them, but I didn't. I think this one down in one of them is winter, and I think this one is spring, but it could be autumn when things are harvested. But anyway, kind of interesting. And then one of the most famous pieces, and I forgot to write the artist down, but there's this very famous salt cellar. And when I was at A&A show in Chicago 2 years ago, a fellow started his talk with a picture of this. And it's like, oh, I've seen that. And it turned out this artist also did a Renaissance medal. So there's a lot of cool stuff to see in this museum. I mean, there's really quite something. And that's the end. And we're back to the emperor.